Does Marathon still hate solo players? On the surface, it looks like things are better. You won't be fighting fully kitted squads of 3 anymore, but if we delve a little deeper, things aren't necessarily that clear cut. So Marathon is coming out later today, and having played the server slam and the previous kind of open testing, there have been some significant changes made to the way that solos play out in this game to make it significantly better to last time. I'm in an interesting position as a creator because I actually haven't played any of the NDA tests in between that first set of testing that we saw where I got universally slated until playing the server slam this week. And so I've seen a dramatic step change from what it was to what it is now. I'm also a almost universally solo player. I pretty much play all my games solo and I don't play them with a squad. And the first time that we played Marathon, it was nigh on impossible to play the game properly if you were an individual, because the game was designed primarily for 3 players to play together as a team, and if you were playing on your own, you'd be thrown into the same matchmaking as those 3 players working together. And in these games that typically have slightly higher time to kill than a game like Escape from Tarkov, this means that you have to be significantly better than the players that you're playing against in order to win that fight. The only other alternative is to skulk around the map, try not to get into any fights at all, be an expert at disengaging and really not interacting with the game in the way it's supposed to be played really at all. The biggest and most dramatic change that most people will know by now between the first iteration and the one that we just saw is the introduction of the solo queue. While in the previous iteration you could be matched with big teams, and you were most of the time, in the latest iteration, if you're playing solo, you're going to be matched with other solos. This has mirrored the way the queues work in other successful games such as Arc Raiders, and it means that it's really fair. The big problems that you get in games where you have big squads, anytime you introduce the combination of no friendly fire, teammate indicators, high time to kill, and the concept of resurrecting your teammates, this makes it impossible to balance solo play versus team play without doing something really drastic. In a game like Escape from Tarkov, this doesn't matter because friendly fire is on and there are no teammate indicators, which means that you're just as likely to kill your own team and your friends than you are the enemy. This makes communication one of the skills required in EFT, but games like this in Marathon and other games like Arena Breakout take this away and imbalance it against solos. Tarkov also doesn't have the resurrection mechanic, so if you do take down one of a squad of 3, you now know that you're permanently fighting against 2 players in that squad, and that third person can't be gotten back up again. So Marathon has ticked the first box of solving this problem, because rather than trying to fix any of this stuff in the way that Tarkov does it, you're just going to be playing against other solos. For a game with a format and mechanics like this, I think that probably does make sense, and as we saw, has worked in Arc Raiders as well. But now we come to the section that doesn't feel as good, which is that you can't just take the solo game mode, throw it in there, and leave it without any other changes without it feeling a little bit off. At this point, I will admit that it is difficult to know with a limited number of hours in the server slam exactly how things are going to play out, but I think the first most starkly obvious thing playing as a solo and getting thrown into raids with other solos is that the AI and the health that they have is not really tuned for individual players. This is tuned for 3 players target firing on individual enemies all at once. While this is quite good for squad play, meaning that you do need to coordinate with your other teammates, so you can't just go off rogue and solo and you do have to work together, when you're playing as a solo using those same HP pools and shields and all the other stuff, it makes it very difficult to kill anything other than the most basic of enemies. Even some of the second tier enemies take more than 1 magazine to kill, and this is a pretty rough experience for solo players. Now there are kind of 2 different ways that Bungie could go with this in changing Marathon. You either take the existing AI and you just downgrade their health and stuff like that so that they are slightly easy to kill if they're matched into a solo lobby. The big problem with this is that this means if you're grouping up in duos or trios, then the AI then feels very different. It takes a different number of shots to kill an enemy depending on whether it's in solo queue or in trio queue, and that could be a bit strange and mess with people's heuristics and the way that they understand the game and the TTK, which is not necessarily great. The other alternative is to slim down the number of enemies. You keep them the same, but you don't have as many spawn. So you can't have as many of the shield guys spawn, or the basic troops, there's 3 rather than 5, which means you don't get overwhelmed as much playing as a solo, but it's totally fine playing as a 3. This would allow you to get the same feel between both game modes, but it might mean that the solo mode does feel a little bit sparse. I'm honestly not sure which route is best, because it is nice to have more enemies with less health. I feel like it just makes the world feel more alive, but maybe having less enemies overall is the better way to go. Sometimes it's not even the AI health per se that is the problem, but more about how you actually interact with the enemies. I mentioned the shield guys earlier. At least with 2 players, the ideal strategy you've got for this is one person goes to aggro them and the other person flanks around the side and shoots them around the shield, or at least that's how I envisaged the game design was meant to be. If you're a solo player, there's not really the opportunity for doing this other than trying to bait somebody else in and get them to shoot them as well, but because you're both going to be unfriendly to each other, that's going to add more complications, and usually the other players are more of a problem than the AI. So you have to do creative stuff like try to shoot them and then move around, get a few shots in before they turn around again with their shield, or try to get on top of crates so that you can shoot over the top to hit their head, but it's less than ideal, and in certain scenarios you just can't get into the right position to be able to do it. This might change later on in the game as we've had more time to play with the different abilities and some of the later game things, but at the moment I feel like when you first load in, you're in the first couple of levels, you just simply don't have the tools to be able to deal with these guys in the way that you would need to. And there's a very early mission that requires you to kill one of these commanders, and usually there's other shield guys around as well, and I found this really quite hard as a newish player. So let's just park the AI thing for a moment. We've also got this hero shooter aspect or element to Marathon, where we've got these different runner shells and they do different things. These are naturally designed to be used in a team and synergize together, but then when we're playing solo, we have to pick one of these jigsaw pieces and try to utilize that to solve every problem that a solo player might get. Naturally, with the shells being reorganized a little bit, the overwhelming majority of successful solos seem to be settling on the assassin runner because you can go invisible, and because there's only one of you, it means your entire team is invisible. In a 3, this matters a bit less because you can still shoot the other 2 people, and the assassin, who's supposed to have a slightly weaker combat kit, is invisible and goes around behind to do flanking or whatever. When you're playing 1v1 and the guy just disappears, this makes it very, very tricky. Now, I will say that Bungie did actually point this out themselves previously when people were calling for a solo queue. They said, well, everybody's just going to pick the invisible character and roam around being invisible. So if they knew that this was going to be a problem, why didn't they just change it a bit? This seems to be the most obvious answer to the whole thing. Don't leave it the way it was. Again, things don't need to be exactly the same in solo as they are in trios. You can adjust stuff a little bit. And this links into my next point as well, which is some of the cores and implants and the upgrades that your character get just aren't designed for solo play whatsoever. You might pick up something where, you connect your medical bot onto a teammate, and then any consumable that you use, they also get some usage of it as well. As a solo player, that one is completely useless. So really, there should be 2 categories, one with solo and one with team play, or at least some enhancement or bonus if you're playing solo. If you look to another game in the extraction adjacent genre, Hunt Showdown, which is more objective based than extracting, but still an extraction shooter nonetheless, you can play solo against teams in that game, and the perks and upgrades that you can attach to your character do actually have modifiers depending on whether you're playing in a group or whether you're solo. Sometimes you might get extra time limit on certain abilities if you're playing a solo, or you might get a slightly different or improved ability that enhances and butters you a little bit up to compensate for the fact that you're playing by yourself. And I feel that Bungie could very easily do this to the cores and implants in the game. They just need to think about it a little bit and implement something like that. For example, rather than it being you're going to share consumables with an enemy, it means that while you're using this core, your own consumables are more powerful, for example. It doesn't have to be anything super complicated, but at least looking at it as a solo and going, well, this is a complete junk attachment and I'm just going to throw it in the bin, we want to avoid that situation. I think the most promising thing about Marathon so far, and the path to where we've got to, is that originally they were very, very restrictive and very strong on their original vision of it being played in 3s, and that was that. And then since then, we've had the release of Arc Raiders, which has obviously been a huge success, and I think it's made the team think a little bit and revalue some of their core principles about the game to then come back and say, okay, we will allow solos. So in my mind, we're actually over the hardest hurdle, which is getting from the trios only mentality to, okay, maybe we'll have a solos queue, a duos queue, and a trios queue to make things fair. That kind of mental barrier was the biggest thing blocking me from playing Marathon. And now that's over, the other stuff is honestly changeable. You can tweak AI values, AI amounts, change some of the cores, some of the implants upgrades, that kind of thing. That stuff can all be done because that's just numbers and fiddling around with balance. So I'm pretty optimistic about the solo ability of the game. That being said, Marathon itself is still incredibly divisive. The way that the art style is, there are some people who really, really like it, and there are some people that really hate it. And I think that the Venn diagram of all the people who might play this game in the first place is kind of divided amongst those 2 groups. And there are some players who literally just will not play because of the way it looks. I do think this is unfortunate. I don't mind the Marathon art style, actually. I do think it is a little bit different and unique, which is kind of cool in my mind. And the way the art has changed from the first iteration to the way it is now actually suits my kind of visual aesthetic a lot better. It's gone from very squeaky clean, Roblox looking kind of thing over to something that looks 3D printed and is intended to be vibrant, but since then something terrible has happened, the entire environment has degraded, you're not really supposed to be there, and it almost kind of clashes with itself on purpose. You've got this bright, vibrant world, we're colonizing this new place, but then something terrible has happened and it's been left in disarray and no one's been there for 100 years. I quite like that clash of vibes. It's supposed to unsettle you and make you not feel comfortable being there, which is sort of the point, and I quite enjoy it. It's also now a lot easier to live and just exist in that world as well. When we first saw Marathon, unless you'd gone back and read loads of the backstory from the other games that were released in the 90s, so pretty impenetrable and kind of hard to get into without watching a 40-minute lore dump YouTube video. You turned up and you really had no idea why you were there. The Marathon colony ship wasn't even really mentioned, so it's not obvious what the game's even named about if you didn't know anything about the lore before. And when you show up, it's just like, okay, we're going to play an extraction shooter in this very shiny world, and that's kind of that. The last test that we played really shifted all this on its head. They've got some really nice intro cinematics. They show the Marathon ship, they show that something terrible has happened, and when you first get there as well, the initial set of raids do allow you to get into the storyline. So it explains who you are, it puts you down, you have the small tutorial, then you have to go and get your missions back from Earth and Mars. But you can only do that by getting the faster than light comms link up and running by hacking in through the UESC. So that's your very first mission, and it gives you something to actually do. You've got your cybernetic AI helper, Cyber Acme, in your head already, so they can talk to you from day one. They're kind of your default trader or helper or vendor or whatever you want to call it. But to access the rest, you've got to get into this comms link to be able to go back and talk to the others, which sets up the pacing quite nicely. And also, you know that you're supposed to be getting to the Marathon ship as well. There's a really, really nice trailer that they've just released, and I will say I do actually love the trailer stuff, probably the most out of everything within this game. I would happily just watch a 10-part series on Netflix in this particular universe, because the initial one that they showed and then this new one that they've done is mind-blowing. It's so good. I love it. The first one was done by the Love, Death and Robots people, and then the second one is also in that similar style. It just looks so good, and it really captures what it is to play an extraction shooter. It just feels so good. So I would love to see that, but needless to say, we actually understand what we're trying to do now, which is get to the Marathon ship to go and run missions there and find out what actually happened on the colony and why everything broke, and there's some kind of alien force up there. And so I feel that some of this directionless that we had in the initial one has been fixed and resolved, which makes me feel a lot more positive about the whole game. The PvP also ratchets up relatively well. When you're first learning, you've got to read pretty much everything. You've got to understand what skills you've got available. There's a lot to try to look through and remap your controls and all that. You don't want somebody beaming down on you with an SMG within the first raid. And I think that the way that they've done the PvP, where it's really low to start with, and then it kind of ticks up as you go into Perimeter, which is the first map, and then Dire Marsh, where there seems to be tons of PvP afterwards, is striking a better balance, because you just don't want to be mobbed on day one while you're still trying to understand and learn the systems and what's exactly happening. Now, playing a bit in the world, I feel that the loot is still maybe a little bit lacking. There's a lot of stuff in there that is just for credits. It's not really obvious what some of these things do, whether they're needed for upgrades or whatnot later. You start figuring it out as you're going through various menus, but I don't feel like it's necessarily anywhere near as good as something like Tarkov, which is a little bit unfair because that's been out for such a long time. But I actually felt that the looting in Ark Raiders felt quite nice as well, because you got a lot of your stuff and you're scrapping things from Ark that you shoot down, and they have the better sort of higher density loot than if you're just scrapping around normally until you go to the high value zones. So I feel like the looting could be a bit better. But what I would say is that the game is more PvP oriented and more geared around you building up your own character. And in that sense, I feel that the build crafting is a lot better than the first one that we saw. Originally, you went in and you know you have these cores and things you have to put on your character, and you got to choose between maybe one or two, and you wouldn't really find many in the first few hours. But now there are basic cores all over the place, and they give you different stats, they give you different sort of secondary abilities, and that starts to enable you to understand the system, piece some things together. I tried this funny melee build out just because I had 3 different parts that linked together, so I wanted to give it a go. That kind of thing is where the creativity, where the interest, you know, oh mate, you know, I've figured out how to make this like crazy build. Look at all these pieces that I've come, and you've, you know, assembled something that just ends up working for whatever reason. That is where the excitement of the build crafting comes in this game, rather than it all being locked like super high up. And I think that that's going to be quite interesting, so we're going to have to see how that one pans out. To do that though, you do have to use the user interface. The UI has been pretty much slated across the board. There's not that many people who don't have at least something to say about it. I do feel like it could be improved quite a lot. It's not really that obvious what's going on, especially with certain upgrades and cores. There's actually quite a lot of real estate within the icons of the items to give more description on which one is which, because, for example, some of the cores in particular, even if you knew which one you had, you can't tell which one is which until you mouse over, because all the cores that go into the same slot of the same grade look identical within your inventory, which I don't think is really that good. They need some little abbreviations or names or something to allow you to start to learn which ones are which, because that really is one of the fundamental things about these extraction shooters, is being able to loot quickly and figure out, make those decisions which is what. Doesn't need to be made super easy or super simplistic. You don't need to highlight stuff, you don't need to color everything in. You just need to give people some information so that they can start to learn and categorize things themselves. So when you scan through an inventory, you go, oh, that one's good. I remember that, you know, AR meant this thing, or, you know, the letter X meant something else. You need some way of being able to tell rather than it just being blank. Some of the menu structure is a little bit confusing, but I think one of the biggest quality of life things that they could do is something similar actually to Ark Raiders, where you click on a part of your player's body while you're doing your build, and that would then show you just the items that would fit into that slot. That would help a lot. Tarkov has something similar to that these days as well, where you click on the drop down, it shows you all the body armors, or you click on the head and it shows you all the helmets. Something like that would really work in this game because there's lots of pieces that need to be put in various places, and an automatic filter like that would go a long way to help putting together your loadout. I do also find some of the controls a little bit controllery coming from a PC perspective. I know the game is built for all of them, so they had to kind of mash them all together, which is inevitable for a game like this, but the hold button to do X I find really clunky on PC because you can map this stuff to loads of different keys, so we don't need all this overlap or press for one thing and hold for another. It's not really necessary on a keyboard or on a PC, so I do find some of that a little bit irritating as well. But overall, honestly, I actually really enjoyed the Marathon Service Lamb. I didn't get as much time to put into it as I would have liked, but I am going to be playing it on launch, at least giving it a good try and seeing what happens, because I think it's interesting. I do think it fits a different style of player, somebody who maybe likes the PvP in Apex Legends, for example, someone who wants a bit more PvP than in Arc Raiders, which can be very, very casual at times, but they don't want to go through the experience of playing Tarkov. I think ex-Tarkov players might actually like this if they're not playing Tarkov anymore and they want another extraction shooter that's kind of a bit more hardcore. Remember that there is actually no secure container in Marathon at all, so it is quite ruthless in that respect. Those kind of players might want to think about giving Marathon a go, or at least watching what happens and deciding later if they want to try it. So with that, as always, a big shout out to all my patrons, and as usual, have fun in your raids.